Hi, so today I'll be presenting on a screening measure that we developed for the BRAINS program, and its working title currently is the SCNS-PNC6, and you can probably see why. So we know that carers of people with brain tumour have high unmet needs, with at least 59% having at least 5 unmet needs, and that's quite a big number. And this is concerning because high needs are associated with higher psychological distress, anxiety, depression, lower preparedness to care, and lower confidence in caring. But even though caregiver unmet needs do seem to have this significant psychological impact, carers do tend to experience barriers to accessing and receiving the help they need to address them. And one such barrier is a lack of formal direct support pathways, as often the only option for psychological support is generic, non-brain cancer specific, and community-based. So in order to fill this need for formal support pathways, we have developed the Adapt Brains portal. The Adapt Brains portal is an online screening and referral portal for supportive care for both the person with brain tumour and their carer. And it uses a step care model, which is a stage system that incorporates interventions of different intensities so that they can match needs of different intensities. And importantly, screening will be conducted routinely to capture changing and emergent needs. So we wanted to do online screening with a step care model, as it allows for a structured, tailored approach to addressing unmet needs, and it minimises impact on human resources, time, expenses, and burden on the caregiver. It's more likely to be used, and during our pilot of the patient equivalent of the portal, we found that caregivers really wanted a similar pathway for themselves. So this is an example of the online screening will potentially look like, using one of the patient screening questions. And one question will be shown at the time, along with the STEM question and the response options, which probably will be the same for the caregivers, and clicking next will take them to the next question. So in the caregiver portal, we'll be screening for distress using the distress thermometer, anxiety and depression using some version of the DAS, and unmet needs, but we didn't at the time have an unmet needs screener. So in the absence of a fit-for-purpose measure, we decided to take an existing one called the Supportive Care Needs Survey, the Partners and Caregiver version, and develop it into a screening tool. And so the Supportive Care Needs Survey is a widely used, comprehensive, multi-dimensional assessment of caregiver unmet needs across the illness trajectory. It's 44 items long, so too long to be a screener in and of itself, and it has 4 domains. And in sum, our aim was to develop a brief screening measure based on the SCNS-PNC to identify brain tumour caregivers' unmet needs. So, to meet that aim, we used baseline and 8 weeks data from 8 weeks responses to the Supportive Care Needs Survey from an existing study called the CARES trial, and that's just a nurse-led intervention that addresses carer preparedness to care and carer distress. And so the caregivers who participated in CARES were adult caregivers of people with grade 3 to 4 high-grade glioma. 92% spoke English at home, and 88% were partners of the patient. And so on that data, we performed psychometric analysis. And for those who maybe aren't aware of what this kind of analysis is, psychometrics is essentially a series of statistical analyses used to develop questionnaires that can detect things or variables that aren't directly observable, such as unmet needs. And psychometric analysis is necessary to ensure that we're asking the right questions to measure what we actually want to measure. And specifically in this context, we're doing this analysis to get the right number of questions for a screening questionnaire to detect the unmet needs of caregivers of people with brain tumour. So these are the specific analyses that we did. First, we used an exploratory factor analysis, which basically helped us to find the structure of the questionnaire. And when I say structure, I'm meaning the number of domains and what items were under each domain. And the result we focused on here was an items factor loading, and we considered items with larger factor loadings to be better for inclusion in the screening tool. We also used frequency analysis to look at the percentage of people who indicated an item was a need, and we considered items to be more suitable for inclusion if they had larger percentages. And we also used simple linear regressions to determine how well an item or combination of items was able to predict variation in the domain score. And for this analysis, we focused on coefficient of determination, or R square, and we considered items with greater R square magnitudes as better for inclusion in the final screening tool. And lastly, we used a ROC analysis, which helped us to see how well a combination of items was able to discriminate between people who had a need and those who didn't have one. And our result of interest here was just the area on the curve, or AUC, with an AUC equal to or over 0.80 being desired. So our statistical analysis process began with just looking at each question in the SENS P&C individually, and this involved assessing the factor loadings, the percentage of people who indicated it was a need, and the R-square of the item. And then we formed 2 and 3 item combinations for each domain out of the best performing items from that single item analysis. And for every combination, looked at the R-square, picked the 10 best performing R-squares per domain, and then looked at those combinations area under the curve. And from all of these analyses, we decided on the final screening questions. And on our final screening questions, we performed supplementary analysis, which looked at how many people at 2 different time points had a need on the broader original 44 items supportive care needs survey, but wouldn't have been detected by our final screening items, as they would have indicated no need on those items. And those who were not detected by our items were considered missed by them. And so these are our final items. After all that analysis, we finally ended with 6 items across 2 domains, 3 items per domain. The first domain's items are more about the impact of the cancer on the carer, while the second domain's item are more centered on the information and communication needs they tend to have. The factor loadings for each item were amongst the largest in their respective domain. More than half of the participants indicated for most of these items that they were in need, and the R-square for most of these items were amongst the strongest in their respective domain. And so these are the combination analysis results. So the items as a combination in the cancer impact domain had the strongest R-square amongst all the combinations in that domain, and the same is the case for domain 2. And this means that out of all the combinations for each of these 2 domains, these 2 sets of items were best at predicting the respective domain scores, and both sets of combinations exhibited excellent discrimination ability with AUCs over 0.80, which means that they can distinguish very well between carers who had a need and those who didn't have a need. And as for our supplementary analysis results, at time 1, only 14 of 188 caregivers with other unmet needs on the full original supportive care needs survey were missed by our screening items. That amounted to only 7.4% of the sample, thus 92.6% were successfully detected by our screening items. And at time 2, 18 out of 158 caregivers with other unmet needs were missed. This amounted to 11.4% of the sample, meaning that 88.6% were successfully captured. But notably of the people missed at time 1, only 3 were missed again at time 2, but 4 people who were considered missed at time 1 didn't complete the questionnaire at time 2. But overall, this analysis does suggest that 1, the majority of caregivers who have unmet needs will be identified by our screening tool, and two, those who are missed at one time point are likely to be picked up at subsequent screenings. So our next steps will involve piloting these 6 items in the Adapt Brains portal to explore their suitability amongst caregivers, and based on the pilot data, we'll go on to modify the screening tool. We already have some feedback from other investigators on the Brains program and the pilot of our patient screener, and based on that, we already anticipate needing to make some changes, such as needing to change the response options to something simpler and easy to understand, as well as tailoring the item wording to be more brain tumor specific. But essentially, our take-home message is that we reduced a 44-item measure to only 6 items. And this is important because not only does it minimize resource use and burden on the caregiver, but fewer items also means the tool is more likely to be used. And importantly, repeat screening is necessary to capture anyone who may have been missed in prior screenings. Thank you.